everybody.
Hi.
It's so wonderful to be here today. So I was just going to put my screen up and we're going to get moving as soon as we get it up. There it is. Check it out. Oh, hey, look at that. See, technology is wonderful, isn't it? So this is, my very first screen. And it just basically tells you a little bit about me. I'm also an author, and I wrote 2 books, The Anniversary and the Commemoration, and I also wrote a nonfiction book, which is the Guide to Behavioral Health and Workbook, The Anniversary, which you all have some copies of that we'll talk a little bit about throughout the presentation. My book, The Anniversary, recently won an international award, so yay. So
Awesome.
the second page is we're going to talk about the learning objectives, because I'm somebody who really believes in learning objectives so that we know where we're going in our presentation. So the first learning objective is to learn to gain a basic understanding for community client rights as per 5122-26-18 of the Ohio Administrative Code. The second learning objective is to gain a basic understanding of the differences between complaints and grievances as per 5122-2618 of the Ohio Administrative Code. The third learning objective is to gain a basic understanding of Ohio Administrative Code 4757 5-03 that governs the Ohio Counselor and Social Workers Board's standards of ethical practice and professional conduct. This is the actual code section that deals with multiple relationships. And lastly, to gain a basic understanding of how to use the Anniversary Behavioral Health Guide and Workbook to assist your clients and their family members with learning the basic concepts related to behavioral health. So with that, I always want people to know a little bit about me and to know that I'm not just talking, that I know what I'm talking about. So you can go to the next screen, which is my professional bio. And, Ritu spoke a little bit about what I've done with my career. I did receive my LISW in 1996. And like she said, I was the client rights officer for 19 years. I'm presently a magistrate judge. I'm the domestic relations chair of the Ohio Association of Magistrates. I'm a member of PAMI Council with Disability Rights Ohio. And I'm a former member of the Advisory Council Department of Senior and Adult Services and a former board member of Westside Community House. And we can go to the next slide. I just want to give a disclaimer. The information that's provided within this presentation does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, all information, content, and material is educational in nature and not should be construed as legal advice. As a judge, I'm not allowed to give legal advice. That's why I need to make sure there's a disclaimer in there. All righty. All righty, so I think the best way to start this presentation is to have a basic understanding of what the Ohio Administrative Code says in respect to client rights. So this is the section of the code that governs client rights. And it requires that each certified mental health and substance use disorder program have a written client rights policy and grievance procedure that is posted in each building, that is operated by the agency, and be given to each client prior to them receiving treatment, except in cases of an emergency. All right. So according to 5122-2618 B1, the client advocate is that individual that's designated by the agency who has the responsibility of assuring compliance with the client's rights and grievance procedure and it's implemented in all of our agencies. What we look at is client rights officer or client rights specialist is the same as client rights advocate. And that's the person who handles the grievances and complaints. It's also important to note that 5122-2618B2 says that a grievance is a written complaint. It's initiated either verbally or in writing by a client or by any other person or provider on behalf of a client regarding a denial or abuse of any client right. So now what we're going to do is a polling question. I want everybody to take off their mute for a second. I think at the bottom they got some place to raise your hand, don't they? Or you could just shout it out. Somebody answer the question for me. Who? But while she's getting that back up, somebody answer, who is the client rights officer at the agency?
Tina Moon and Cassie.
All right. It's Tina?
And Cassie.
And Cassie. Okay. So who can tell me their extension?
100.
All right. Who said that?
Olga.
Hi, Olga. Good. Okay. All right. I didn't know how we were going to do this, so I just had this. We could put it in the poll in the chat, but we'll keep going. So good. That's important to know, that you know who your client rights officer is and what their extension is. So for a complaint to be considered a grievance, it must violate a specific client right as outlined in 5122-2618 of the Ohio Administrative Code. It's also important to note that behavioral health patients are also afforded protection from abuse and neglect, and those standards are outlined in the Ohio Revised Code. Sometimes a violation of a client right is also a violation of abuse or neglect standard and or an ethical violation under the employee's licensing board. So like an example would be a social worker, a counselor, the nurse, a pharmacist, a doctor. So an example is a client at Bedrock Health Agency that reports that their therapist, who has an LPCC credential, assaulted her. If this violation is substantiated, and that means it's found to be true, this would be a client rights violation, a violation of the therapist's professional license, and an abuse violation. All right. Okay. The rights of those receiving behavioral health services are guaranteed by both the Ohio Administrative Code and the Ohio Revised Code. And alleged violations are investigated by the Adamsboro Client Rights Officer, the agency client rights officer, or cooperatively with both client rights officers. Additionally, behavioral health consumers can contact the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services if they are unhappy with the outcome of a client rights investigation that occurred at the agency, or they could also contact Disability Rights Ohio. It's also important to know that a client or their family member can contact the board client rights officer, the agency client rights officer, Disability Rights Ohio, and OMAS individually or all at the same time. Now, candidly, OMAS probably won't come out if the client rights officers at the agency and the county are investigating, but Disability Rights Ohio actually might show up. So, you know, you want to make sure people know what their options are. Let's go to the next slide. So what I did was I just went and looked inside the Adamsboro agency report, and what they have is the client rights report. They do it every year. So in 2019, there were 816 complaints and grievances from agencies, okay, that were reported to the board. And there were 335 complaints and grievances regarding substance use disorders. And then there were 360 complaints and grievances about both categories reported directly to the board as opposed to the agency. Okay, just so you guys have that for your background. All right, so most of this presentation is audience participation. And I don't know, Asha, were you able to give people copies of the code?
The code, no. A large number of them have the workbook.
Okay, but I don't know if I put these code sections in the workbook. I don't think I did. So what we'll do,
You know, what we can do, Judy, after this meeting, we will pass out the specific codes.
okay, so what we're gonna do on this, because you don't have the code section in front of you, is we're gonna wing it. We're gonna pivot. It's easy to pivot. So what we're gonna do is read the scenarios and then we're gonna talk it through as a group. So that means I'm gonna want you to unmute. I definitely want you to participate because that's the best way to learn. So let's go to the first scenario. All righty. So Fred goes through Bedrock Mental Health Agency's intake process to receive case management and medication management services. Fred does not disclose that he has a criminal history, specifically conceals being a registered sex offender, and is placed with a female case manager. One of the main purposes of seeking services is to find housing. Fred intentionally has his partner, Wilma, apply for housing to conceal his identity for the housing applications. And we'll go to the next slide, sorry. Okay, so now we're gonna take some time. We're gonna answer these 4 questions. This is a little bit intense, this one. But the questions we're gonna ask is Bedrock Agency obligated to provide services to Fred? Can Fred refuse to provide his criminal background to Bedrock Agency, and will having a criminal record prevent him from receiving public housing? 3, if Bedrock Agency decides not to provide services to Fred, is this a violation of Fred's client rights? Is there a point where Bedrock can deny Fred's service and refer him to another agency? And lastly, if Bedrock Agency makes a decision to change Fred's current case manager over Fred's objections, is this a violation of Fred's client's rights? I know you guys are on bated breath. You want to know the answers to these pressing questions. So to the next slide. What we're going to do is discuss this and then we'll talk about the answer. So I don't want everybody to be shy. I want to know how many people think Bedrock Agency is obligated to provide services to Fred? Melanie, are you saying something, dear?
I said no, I don't believe so.
How about you, Katrina? What do you think?
I guess, wouldn't it be considered discrimination if they refused service?
Okay. I want some other people. Hassan, I want you to unmute. Tell me what you think.
On a pu que le dire.
No, Erna, you said something?
No.
Okay. Hassan, what do you think? Nancy, what do you think?
I'm not sure.
Okay, how about you, Tiny? How about you, Yusuf? Somebody else, tell me what y'all think.
This is Nasra. I think
No,
since he was sex offender, so I think the agency is not obliged to provide him. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And Yusuf, did you say no?
no, I don't think they are obligated to provide service.
Okay. Well, let's get to the answer to this pressing question.
Okay,
You can
sorry
go to
guys,
the
I
next.
say no too.
Okay. I want you guys to see the answer. The agency may be obligated to provide services to Fred. Excuse me, people. Because according to Ohio Administrative Code 512226-18E4, every client has the right to participate in any appropriate, which is underlined, and available service that is consistent with the individual service plan, regardless of the refusal of any other service, unless that service is a necessity for clear treatment reasons and requires the person's participation. So I want you all to know, this was kind of a trick question, but these are the things that you are dealing with within your agency. It depends if, because Fred has to come to Bedrock Agency to receive case management and medication management with the goal of achieving permanent housing. This right allows for Fred to receive either medication or case management together or exclusive of each other. We like to call this right the linking right. You cannot link services. You can't have one service, like you can't make someone say, hey, in order to get case management, you have to get medication management too. Okay, so the agency can help Fred with his goals despite his despite his criminal record. So we have to go forward to see if we are going to look at discharging him. We got to do some more stuff before we can get there. So let's go to the next slide. So the next question is, can Fred refuse to provide his criminal background to Bedrock Agency? And will having a criminal background prevent him from receiving public housing? So I want everybody to help come in and jump on in and tell me what you think. I want to know what Nassarar thinks. I sounded your name out.
Yeah. I think he can refuse since it's his private thing.
Okay. All righty. I'm going down the list to see who I got in here I can call on. How about you? Let's see. Wait a minute now. I went up too far. Christina, what do you think? I couldn't see your name, girl. It was at the bottom.
Well, I already know the answer to it, so I'm gonna pass it on to one of the case managers.
Okay, all righty, that's fine. How about Katora?
Autar.
I'm sorry, Katora. I'm very I'm really hard. I have a problem with names sometimes. I'm so sorry. What do you think?
Yes, hello. I think I'm gonna say like Christina, I know the answer. Actually, no, I'm joking.
Oh, okay.
I don't
was
know
funny,
the
girl.
answer. But I think he does not have to reveal his background history, but I think he should be provided with housing.
Okay, let me ask Jacqueline. Jacqueline, what do you think?
I don't know if Fred can refuse to provide his criminal background, but I know that depending on the housing agency, certain public housing agencies do have like requirements regarding criminal records, and certain records can prevent them from getting public housing. It just depends on which agency.
All righty, that was an excellent answer. Excellent. Let's go to the next question so we can get to the answer. Or I'm sorry, to get to the answer of the question. So if he is receiving public subsidized housing, if that's what he wants, if that's his goal, he'll be required to disclose his criminal record so that his case manager can assist him with completing the paperwork to have his name placed on a public housing list. However, there are 2 felonies that will automatically disqualify Fred from receiving federally funded low-income and subsidized housing. The first is if he has a lifetime registration on the sex offender registry. The second is if he's been convicted of the manufacture or production of methamphetamines and federally assisted housing. And it's also important to note that if Fred or any member of his household fits into these categories, he would be precluded from receiving public housing. So maybe he didn't do it, but he has, you know, a child that did it, that lives with him. Then he wouldn't be able to get this kind of housing. And I think this is something that's good for you all to know. We're going to go forward to the next slide.
So Judy, can I just pop something in here?
Sure you can.
With regards to crimes, there are certain
Right, we're about to go to that one next. That's the next slide, Ritu.
Okay, sorry.
Right, so it says, it's important that you know that HUD oversees many housing programs that have the same criminal history policies, which are a permanent ban on admission if the applicant or family member is convicted of producing methamphetamine at federally assisted housing, a permanent ban on admission for lifetime registered sex offenders and their family members, a 3-year ban for prior evictions from federally assisted housing for drug-related activity unless the applicant is rehabilitated. If the person is trying to get Section 8, the landlord is required to deny admission to a current user of illicit substances. And lastly, a Section 8 landlord or, you know, private housing, like, you know, for those type of things that are subsidized housing and private residents, they have the discretion to admit applicants with a history of drug-related offenses, violent criminal histories, or crimes that threaten health, safety, or peaceful enjoyment of the property. We'll go to the next one. This is an extensive answer to this question, sorry. But I do think we want to go through this and flush it out. So also, in addition to the federal regulations, each state has its own set of eligibility criteria that may disqualify some felons from applying or receiving public housing. But what I want you guys to get the takeaway from this is that having a criminal record doesn't automatically disqualify Fred or members of his household from receiving low-income housing. The criteria for accepting someone with a criminal background differs depending on the local public housing authority or property management company. And it's still more. There's more. So when you go to the next one for me, Asha, please. Thank you. But there are a few, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Who had a question? Who was saying something?
Nothing, it was me. This is the correct slide, right?
Right, yes, it is. It is. I want you all to know that there are a few HUD programs that do not mandate a federal criminal background requirement. These programs mostly target the needs of homeless persons. So if Fred was applying for Shelter Plus Care and a supportive housing program that provides support for homeless shelters and transitional housing, he wouldn't have to give his background. Or if he's applying for the HOPWA program, which is the Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS, and they serve people who are living with AIDS and HIV who are low income. So those 2 programs or 3 programs are an exception to the rules that we just spoke about. You can go to the next slide, Asha. Thank you, dear.
This is the next part.
Right, we're still going on. So we're going to go through the analysis. It's important that when you do this kind of work, you do the analysis. You just can't go from the beginning to the end. You got to go through all of these steps. So in order for Bedrock Agency to determine if they can assist Fred with finding housing, they first have to determine if he has a lifetime registration as a sex offender, or if he or other people in his household are homeless. So if Fred is homeless and needs assistance, they may be required to allow him to participate in the case management program if the agency determines that the services are both available and appropriate. Because those are the standards that we're looking at. We're going to go to the next slide. Well, you guys are like, this is a long answer. So what you would need to do is, if Fred is not homeless and he does have a lifetime registration and he's seeking public housing, then you all, or not you all, the Bedrock treatment team would need to have a meeting with Fred and explain that the agency would be unable to assist him with meeting his goal of achieving public housing. But there is still a possibility that Fred could obtain private housing. But the agency would need to advise Fred that they would be required to disclose his criminal record on any housing applications that they assist with. So if somebody says, hey, there's a housing application that goes with this, you can't conceal his record. Rita,
Judy,
you have a question?
What if Bedrock doesn't know?
Well, that's what we're going to do in the next slide. So you're always like a slide ahead. You're a forward thinker, Ritu.
I'll shut up now.
No, not at all. You're doing good. So we're going to go to the next slide. So, what we're going to talk about is if Bedrock Agency decides not to provide services to Fred, is this a violation? And is there a point for us to refer him to another agency? So before we get to the answer, let me ask some people. Don't go backwards. Yeah. Let me ask some people in the crowd here. Don't all jump in at once now, because I will call on you. How about you, Melanie? What do you think?
As far as referring him to another agency goes, or?
Yes. Do you think if they say they don't want to provide services to him, they found out he got this whole sex offense thing behind him, and they don't want to work with him. If they say we don't want to work with you anymore, are they violating his client rights?
At that point, if it's a lifetime, from what I'm understanding, no, they would not.
They would not be violating his rights. Okay. Yeah. Do you think that there's a point where they can say, you know what, we don't want to work with you anymore, Fred, go to another agency?
Beyond, in regards to details outside of the sex offender registration, or?
Yeah, I mean, he's a sex offender, so I don't want to work with you. So what I'm going to do is send you somewhere else. Does it come to a point that they can do that?
I would think at that point, then that would fall more towards discrimination, and not really be supported by client right status.
Okay, let me ask Cassie. Cassie, what do you think?
I know the answers to this, so I'll let one of the managers answer.
Okay, how about you, Tynese? You got to unmute though. Okay, how about you, Yusuf? What do you think?
I think maybe, yeah, I think maybe they are violating their client's right.
You think it is a violation?
Maybe, yeah.
How about, do you think the agency, does it ever come a point where they can say, we want you to go somewhere else? We don't want to work with you.
That will be a discrimination to the client.
Okay. So what we're going to do, guys, is go ahead and get to the answer. Uh-oh. Look, I did something. I don't know what I did. Okay. I don't know what I did. I did something, though.
Well, you're still
I
on
think
the
we're
call,
okay.
so-
I can't see the words, though. I did something where I no longer can see the words.
Should I
Go
read it
down
for
to
you?
the bottom of your screen. Do you see everyone's faces? Can you see anything related?
No,
to
I could
Zoom?
just see, it's probably something with what I'm doing. Let's see, it's the view, it's an exit full screen. It's something about how I'm viewing it. I'm sorry, I don't know. I'm about to fix it. I'm gonna try.
All right.
Okay, there it is. Okay. I did it, guys. Okay. So the answer is Bedrock Agency cannot have a policy that makes having a sex crime conviction an automatic bar to receiving treatment or having a female case manager. However, the agency can convene a treatment team meeting and make this determination that a female case manager is not clinically appropriate for Fred. It is important to remember that clients do not have the right to mandate the gender of their case manager. Fred can request the case manager and the agency makes a determination of who would be most appropriate for this role. It also is important to remember that if Bedrock Agency decides that they need to make changes to Fred's treatment plan, that he has a right to participate in a development review and revision of his own individualized treatment plan and receive a copy of it. And see, I still did something to this because now I don't see anybody's faces, I just see mine. You can go to the next stream, Asha. What did I do?
Judy, it sounds like you have it in speaker view, and you probably need to go back and put it in gallery view.
Oh, gallery view. But where's that at? I see view options.
Upper right-hand corner.
Oh, upper right hand. Okay, I'm in the right. Oh, I see view here. Okay. Oh, I see. I get it. What's good? You good. Whoever just told me that. Thank you. Okay. What I want you all to know is to know what the definition of a sex offender is. I think this is very important for our discussion here. A sex offender is defined as a person who has committed a sex crime. But what constitutes a sex crime differs by culture and legal jurisdiction. Please note that most convicted sex offenders have convictions for crimes of a sexual nature. However, some sex offenders have simply violated a law contained within a sexual category. Some of the crimes which usually result in a mandatory sex offender classification are a second prostitution conviction, sending or receiving obscene content in the form of an SMS text message, and relationship between young adults and teenagers resulting in corruption of a minor. If any sexual contact was made by the adult to the minor, then child molestation has occurred. Other sexual offenses are sexual assault, statutory rape, bestiality, child sexual abuse, incest, rape, and sexual imposition. You can go to the next slide. So Bedrock may be able to refer Fred's case out to another agency. If Fred has received an order from the court that mandates that he not be around women, and I underlined that and bolded it, if there are no available case manager If this is the situation, Bedrock may refer Fred to another agency where he can have a male case manager assigned to him to continue to work on meeting his goals. If Bedrock decides to make this determination, it is imperative that they adhere to Ohio Administrative Code 5122-26-18E12, which states that Fred be afforded the right to be informed a reasonable amount of time in advance, the reason for terminating participation in a service, and be provided a referral unless the service is unavailable or not necessary. Asha, you can go to the next slide. Also, Fred is afforded the right not to be discriminated against for receiving services on the basis of race, ethnicity, age, color, gender, national origin, sexual orientation, physical or mental handicap, developmental disability, genetic information, basically HIV status, or any manner prohibited by local, state, or federal law. Hassam, you have a question? Hassam?
Yes.
Are you trying to ask a question?
No, thank you.
Okay. Here, Bedrock Agency can't terminate Fred simply because he's a sex offender, because to do so would be a violation of his client rights as afforded by the Ohio Revised Code, Ohio Administrative Code, and federal law. So this is what Ritu was just talking about. You know, I put in here some things I feel are best practices when we're dealing with these type of situations. I believe that when you're doing your intake, you should determine if a potential client has a felony for the purposes of determining appropriate services. If the person is coming there for housing programs, you probably want to make a bigger deal about this so that you know what you're dealing with, because what you don't want to do is spend days and days and days trying to get somebody housing in a program they're never going to qualify for because of their criminal background. And if you do get the information, you can use it to, help you with your determining, who would be appropriate clinical staff, who would, you want to use it for treatment planning and also for determining appropriate services. But I want you all to make sure you take note that if you do decide that you would want to deny Fred, you'd have to adhere to 5122-2618E13, which states that Fred be given the right to be informed of the reason for denial of services.
So
This
Judy,
means
I have a question.
Sure.
So in our situations, at this true for case managers, they're given a list of names and contact numbers, and they go out and contact clients and try to ascertain their needs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, although all criminal history is public through the Cuyahoga County Clerk's Department, and it's all available online,
Yes.
when are we permitted to actually, or when are case managers specifically allowed to look up someone's criminal history?
How could they stop you? It's public record. Anybody can look up anybody's criminal history. What you can't do is look up somebody's criminal history and then say, hey, you're a sex offender, so I'm not going to serve you. If they're a sex offender, again, it doesn't mean that they did something that it's bad. But I'm just going to ask everybody this. Would you say that prostitution, soliciting a prostitute is the same as touching a child?
There are 3 levels of registration for what sexual assault. And so level 1 is for a limited amount of time, and it's not that onerous. Level 2 is more onerous, and it's a longer period of time. I think it might be up to 15 years. And level 3, which is included for cases of rape, for example, that is a lifetime registration.
Yes.
And by registration, that means they need to be registered. They need to report in where they currently live, who they live with.
Absolutely.
And that has to be recorded. When a lot of times when we have cases at that level, oftentimes someone may or may not be registered. And that is a really problematic situation. So I think when case managers have questions about a client, whether or not it has to do with cases of sexual assault, it's always helpful to reach out to Christina or to reach out to Cassie and share your concerns so that we can work together as a team to determine the best next steps.
Absolutely. Great advice, Ritu. So, does anybody have questions about this before we go to the next question? Calling once, twice, 3 times.
Hi.
Hi, Basima. Go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah, I'm new here, so for the record, the case manager has to check the record?
No, what Ritu said is if you're having an issue with a client and you feel that there's some concerns regarding this, you want to reach out to Christina or Cassie.
Yeah, but the client's record should already be known by the staff, right?
So Ritu, she wants to know that by the time she receives a client, is this something that she will get information about, or is she supposed to check herself? That's what she wants to know.
So this is always this is a great question. The one
and I'm
thing
going to answer it.
When we do, so we have 3 steps when we actually 4. The first is over the phone. The second is when they have a psychiatric evaluation. The third is a diagnostic assessment. And the fourth is the creation of the ISP. Those are 4 separate meetings. During the psych eval and the diagnostic assessment, there are specific questions asked of the client with regards to any criminal history, which is a part of their psychosocial background. So typically, we do collect that information. The one thing that no one can guard against is a client that lies. So if a client does not disclose or lies about their background, there is nothing that we can do to really, other than doing a criminal check for every single client, which we do not do.
Well, you could, but I'm going to be clear. That's what I was going to say. I'll be happy to answer that question. What needs to happen is you can't do things individually. Whatever you do has to be your agency's policy. So if your policy is to collect information at intake on that, then that's what you do for everybody. But you can't say, you know what, I don't like Fred, so I'm going to go ahead and run his information and see if I can find a way to discharge him. That's when it becomes a problem. Does everybody understand? Okay. So if you make a policy that says everybody who comes through intake, you're going to run their criminal history, then I don't think that's going to be a problem if it's public record. So that's what, you might want to consider doing. And maybe whoever is your intake specialist, maybe that could be something that they could just run their social security number or whatever. But you have to use it only for treatment planning, not to just have a way to get rid of somebody. So if there's somebody who's there, you don't want them around women. I want to be clear about the sex offender situation because there are some sex offenders who assault men. So if that's the case, you may not want that person to have a male case manager. I think what you need to do is look at each person individually and design their treatment plan around their individual, situation. questions before we move to the next one?
Yes, ma'am, Miss Judy. I have one more question for you
please.
before we do. During the time that we do have somebody established with our services, say hypothetical sense, looking at a level 2 trial and accusation, and possibly 15 years on the sex offender list if found guilty. Is there any type of suggestion or recommendation other than what you have discussed to consider when they are already a client with CBHC?
So you're asking me if there's somebody who is already a client, is there a way for you to find out if they're have a criminal record? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, in a way, and then also any type of addendums and advocacy or suggestions that you would have to offer if we are.
So I'm going to answer part of this, Judy, if you don't mind.
Okay, please.
So from CBHC's perspective, okay, if any case manager under any circumstance is uncomfortable with a client, you're not gelling with them, you're not able to communicate with them, you're afraid of whatever the reason may be, you are always free to come back to us to talk to Christina, to talk to Cassie, talk to myself. You are always welcome to come back to us. This client is not right for me. And you are welcome to do that at any point in the process, whether they've been with you for a long time or they are brand new. And we will find an alternative for that client based on feedback from you.
And I think that's a perfect answer. And I just want to just say that, it's important that you all have supervision, which I know you are having. These are the times to bring up times when you're feeling uncomfortable. And sometimes there could be things where you're not uncomfortable, but the supervisor makes a determination that we need to do something different. I recall working on a case where we had someone who filed a grievance with me because the agency did make the determination to transfer him to a new worker. And this person really liked his worker. But the reason why the supervisors made that decision is that this client did not even realize how inappropriate he was being with his male case manager. Basically, the supervisors determined he kind of had a crush on a guy. And that he was doing things that, the client was, the worker was trying to help the client, but the client in some ways was trying to solicit his worker. But the worker was new and didn't realize that. They made a clinical determination that it was in that client's best interest not to be on this person's caseload. So they changed it. So you need to be working with your supervisor. You need to be coming in, talking with them during supervision about any issues, just like Ritu said, that could be problematic. We can move, our caseloads around, but they can't do anything if they don't know what's going on. So what we're going to do is move to the next one. We're going to move to the second scenario. Betty discloses to office staff that she's being sexually harassed by her case manager, Barney. Barney is a licensed social worker, LSW, and Betty is at a loss as to what her options are. So we're going to go to the next one. These are the questions we're going to discuss, okay? Is Betty's disclosure to the Bedrock office staff a complaint or grievance? What should the office staff do about Betty's disclosure? 3, if what Betty reported is true, what rights have been violated? So we're going to go to the first question, and we're going to talk about it. Is Betty's disclosure to the Bedrock office staff a complaint or a grievance? So, Basima, what do you think? How about Nancy? Nancy, what do you think?
A grievance?
Okay. All righty. How about you, Erna? Am I saying your name right? Arena? Arona? I-R-I-N-A?
Arena.
Arena. I had it right, girl. That's good. Okay. What is Arena? Do you know the answer?
I think it's complain.
Okay. All righty. How about you, Nasara?
I think it's complain.
Okay. Well, let's go to the next slide. We're going to all see who's right. So according to 51222618B2 of the Ohio Administrative Code, a grievance is a written complaint initiated either verbally or in writing by a client or by any other person or provider on behalf of a client regarding denial or abuse of any client rights. So what's important to note about this is that Betty disclosed verbally that she's being sexually harassed by her case manager, Barney. This allegation is regarding an alleged abuse of her rights, and as such, what she disclosed should be considered as a grievance, even though she said it instead of writing it. So let's go to the next one. Let's get some more answers. So what should the office staff do about Betty's disclosure? Because these are the things that actually happen to people, you know? So Katrina, do you want to answer this?
What should the office staff do?
Yes.
Well, they would have to file a grievance.
Okay, that's a good answer. I want everybody to know there's no wrong answers here. These whole scenarios are for discussion, and we use these so that we can learn. And there's a lot of these questions don't have a right or wrong answer. They're just for us to have a discussion point. So Hassam, what do you think?
I think we should file it, and if we can upgrade it to the supervisor to discuss it with it.
Okay. All right. Good answer. Melanie, you're the last person. What's your thought?
Yeah, the documentation and making sure that it gets documented appropriately as a grievance within the office.
Excellent. Let's go to the answer. Bedrock Agency office staff should provide Betty with a grievance form and the name and extension of the agency client rights officer as per Administrative Code Section 5122-26-18B1. The client rights officer, remember, is that person who is charged with investigating complaints and grievances within the agency. The Bedrock Agency staff should also advise the client rights officer and the management team of what was reported to them by Betty. So that, you know, nobody can come back later and say, you all didn't tell somebody. She told you and you told someone. And that's really important. I had a really serious case in another county when I was at the Adams board where someone told another staff member that they were being sexually abused by their therapist. And that staff person didn't believe it, so they didn't tell anybody. Well, later on, it came out that it was a good chance that these allegations were true. What you don't want to be is complicit. It's not your issue. They told you, and then you discharged your duty by telling the right people and doing the right things. So you give the person a grievance form, you tell them the number of the client rights officer, you tell the client rights officer, and you tell the supervisors and your management team. Because what they're going to do is go back and they're going to ask Betty, you told our staff person something yesterday. We want to follow up with you on it. And then they'll take it from there. Does everybody understand? Yes? I'm assuming that's a yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. We're going to go to the next slide. Also, what we should do is make an appointment for Betty to meet with the agency client rights officer. And note that 512618J2, 3, and 4 of the rule that says that the client must be available. The client advocate or client rights officer must be available to assist Betty with filling out her grievance. Further, the grievance must be put in writing. And if Betty is unable or unwilling to write out her grievance, then a client rights officer will be charged with the task of reducing her verbal grievance into writing. Lastly, the grievance must be dated and signed by Betty or the individual who's filing the grievance on behalf of Betty. If the grievance is not signed by Betty, then it must have an I never can say this word right. Somebody say it for me.
Attestation?
Thank you. By the client advocate, that the written grievance is a true and accurate representation of Betty's grievance. So that means that, what we used to have in the past is people just make these allegations and they don't want to sign it, and nobody can vouch that, what they told you is true. They cleaned this part of the rule up. We've had people who don't want to sign the grievance or they don't want to fill it out. Now I have a question. I'm going to call on one person. I'm going to call on Tynese. Tynese, when people don't want to fill out their grievance form, what do you think the issue is? I'm listening.
I think that it is like shame, or, they don't want anybody to personally know that this happened to them. There's guilt that they feel. They feel like it's their fault that they may have done something that have caused this action. So, it's and fear, fear of what the repercussions of that may be. They may be thinking, because the counselor or therapist or whomever, this is a trusted person of authority, they may think that something's going to happen to them because they, spoke up.
Great answers, Tynese. Thank you so much for participating. And you know what? Everything Tynese said is true, but it could also be just as simple as your client can't write. Some people don't know how to write. And we need to be really careful, because we all make an assumption that if you live in the United States of America, you can write, but everybody cannot. Some people are afraid. They're afraid if they put this in writing, the case manager is going to see it and they're going to do something to them. They know where they live at. They know things about them. But also, you see sometimes where people are afraid to come forward, because if my case manager did this to me, then that means everybody's going to do something to me. So I don't want anybody to know, because it's going to make me a victim even further than what I am right now. So what we want to do is, when we're having these kind of situations, we want to figure out what's kind of going on without making people feel small or feel inferior. If somebody cannot read, you can sometimes realize they can't read because they do certain things. Like when there are letters or pages or things where people could read around, they don't. They don't even look at it, or they just glance at it, and you can tell that they don't really know what's going on. Sometimes that's an indicator that people cannot read. They may not do things like write their name, or maybe very simple things, but they can't read complex things. And if you see that, instead of making somebody feel bad, you say to them, would you like for me to read this for you? So those are some of the things that we can do to get Betty to participate, because what we don't want is for Barney to be harming our clients, because he's putting the agency at risk. So now we're going to go to the next question. I think it's another question. Yes. All right. So if what Betty reported is true, what rights have been violated? And I'm going to ask Couture to tell me what rights have been violated.
I think her rights as a client to be protected, they were violated.
Okay. You know what? I know you all don't have this in front of you, so just kind of guess if you can. Jacqueline, what do you think?
I would say abuse, her right.
Okay, that's a good answer. I got two Olgas that's on this line. Olga Abramowski and Olga Y.
Yes.
Wonderful. Olga, what do you think? Olga that's
A?
talking.
Honestly, yeah, I think I agree with I don't know the name. But actually, both of them, I think they're right. But the client's right and the other one.
Okay, well, let's go to the answer because this is harder to do when you don't have this in front of you, and I apologize for that. So according to 5122, 2618, this is the number one right, okay, of all the client rights. And that is all clients have the right to be treated with consideration and respect for personal dignity, autonomy, and privacy. Excuse me. Additionally, 5122, 2618 E2 says that all clients have the right to be free or to have reasonable protection from physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, neglect, and inhumane treatment. Here, Bedrock's management team should immediately remove Barney as Betty's case manager. And the agency client rights officer should be investigating to determine if Barney has in fact sexually harassed Betty. Additionally, Betty should be giving the information to the Ohio Social Worker and Counselor Board, as Barney is a licensed social worker. And she should be advised that she can contact them to also file a complaint. We're going to go to the next slide. We're going to do scenario 3. This is a real important one. This happens in a lot of agencies, so let's discuss it. Pebbles is receiving medication management for a controlled substance, Xanax, from Bedrock's Behavioral Health Agency. Pebbles has been running out of her prescribed Xanax a week sooner than she should be. Her prescriber has noticed that this has become a pattern over the past couple of months. Pebbles recently also had a positive urine screen for an illicit substance at the time of her medication management appointment. And as per Bedrock's policy, no refill of Xanax was given. Pebbles is upset that her prescribing provider will not refill her Xanax prescription and wants to file a grievance. Pebbles has verbally reported that the provider is not giving her the care she needs and deserves. That sounds like some of our clients, doesn't it? Let's go to the next slide. All right, these are the questions we're going to ask. Can Pebbles file a grievance against her prescribing provider? If so, what rights can Pebbles allege that her prescribing provider violated? Should Pebbles be allowed to change her prescribing provider to a new provider within the agency? These are the questions we're going to ask. So we're going to go to the first question. And the question is, can Pebbles file a grievance against her prescribing provider? So let's see who we haven't called on in a while. Let's call on Basima. What do you think, Basima?
I don't think she can file it as a grievance because the provider give her like for a certain time and she used it before that, she finished it before the certain time. So there's something wrong that the provider has to check on it why she finished it earlier.
That's a very good answer. How about you, Nasara? What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with Basima because it was not time for the refill yet, so I don't think he can file that grievance.
All right, let me see who else. Okay. All right, let's see who else I could. How about Olga Y? She hasn't said anything. Olga Y, what do you think?
I would say yes.
You say yes, she can file a grievance.
I would say yes, and then investigation.
All righty, good answers. Let's go to the answer right now. So according to 5122-26-18B2, a grievance means a written complaint that's either initiated verbally or in writing regarding a denial or abuse of any client right. And what's important to know here is any client who believes that their rights have been violated has the right to file a grievance. But this does not mean that because a grievance was filed, that the investigation will substantiate the allegation made by Pebbles. So Bedrock Agency should ensure that they give her a copy of the agency grievance procedure, as well as the name, title, locations, hours of availability, and the telephone number of the agency client rights officer. We're going to go to the next slide. So what rights can Pebbles allege that her prescribing provider violated? So Cassie, I know you may know the answer, but I want you to jump in and tell me what you think. What rights can she say were violated?
She can say that her right to care was violated.
Okay, that's a good answer. Jacqueline, what do you think?
Aside from what Cassie said, I'm really not sure.
All righty. That's a good answer. Honest answers. Just be honest, because nobody knows all this stuff. Let's go to the next question. To the answer. So here, Pebbles is alleging that because she was denied the opportunity to receive a refill of her controlled substance, she was not treated with respect and dignity. So that's going to be the first right, okay? But it's highly unlikely that the agency or any outside agency will substantiate this grievance because Bedrock Behavioral Health followed its prescribing protocols and practices. If a client tests positive for an illicit substance, then he or she should not be given a refill of a controlled substance. Further, when a provider is prescribing a client a controlled substance, the information should be entered into the Ohio Automatic RX Reporting System, commonly known as ORS, that is operated by the state of Ohio's Board of Pharmacy and allows doctors and pharmacists to view a patient's prescription history on controlled substances to help them detect possible prescription drug abuse or diversion so they can intervene with high-risk patients. And then we're going to continue on the next page. Here, Pebbles has been running out of Xanax a week early, and this has been occurring for several months. This is a possible indicator that Pebbles may be abusing her medication or developing an addiction, and this issue should be addressed immediately. Further, the prescriber and the agency staff should assess for possible addiction and to refer Pebbles for an addiction assessment and or treatment services. Let's go to the next slide. Should Pebbles be allowed to change her prescribing provider to a new provider within the agency? And this is where it really gets fun. Let's hear what other people think about that. Nancy, what do you think?
I think it's to the discretion of the agency as to whether or not she can change.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Within the agency.
That's a good answer. Melanie, what do you think? Chinese, what do you think?
I'm gonna say no.
Okay. All righty. Let's go to the answer. Hope it's working, Asha. Is it working? Okay. So what's important about this is you all had the right answer. There's no wrong or right answer here. This will be dependent on Bedrock's agency's policy. Some agencies have a policy that will allow for one change of a provider by a client. Some agencies do not allow for a change of a provider and will only make a change if they feel that it's clinically appropriate. But the most important takeaway from this is to follow what your agency's policy is and don't make it up along the way. If the policy is the person gets one change and that's her first time asking for a change, then change it. But keep note of it because you're not going to allow her to not follow what the rules are. Because if she dies on your watch, because they're prescribing her this medication and you can clearly see she's using illicit substances, and it very well appears that she is, having some kind of drug issue, the agency has a responsibility to act. You have to get that person referred for drug treatment or assessment and then treatment. Let's go to the next one.
Judy, I just want to give you a heads up.
Yes.
Folks are going to have to leave in about 12 minutes.
Okay, let's knock this out. We're at the very end.
Okay, cool.
So I'm going to go through this quick. Bam Bam, a case manager who's employed with Bedrock's Behavioral Health Agency, has a family member, Dino, who happens to run a group home. Bam Bam is not a licensed professional, but Bedrock Agency has a policy that states that all case managers, irrespective of their licensure, must adhere to the standards of 4757 of the Ohio Administrative Code that deals with social workers and counselors. So long story short, Bam Bam has referred several clients from Bedrock Behavioral Health Agency to Dino's group home. Additionally, some of the clients from Bedrock's agency who now resides in Dino's group home are also on Bam Bam's caseload. We're going to go to the next question. I'm not going to ask you guys to participate on this. I'm just going to go quickly so we can get done and I'll make it in time. So the question is there anything wrong with this scenario? And what if Bam Bam works for both the group home and the agency? We're going to go to the next slide. The next slide after that. So what's important to note is this is a possible violation of the 4757-503 because basically it says that you should avoid multiple relationships and conflicts of interest with any client, ex-client, family member, or other persons. That's why I underlined that. Encountered in a professional or non-professional setting, which are not in the best interest of the client and might impair professional judgment, or which increases the risk of client consumer of services exploitation. We're going to keep going to the next one. And it requires that you avoid any potential harmful effects of non-client contacts on your practice. And the standard is reasonable and ordinary. That's what we look at for the standard. So long story short, the argument can be made that Bam Bam placing clients from his caseload and not advising the agency that his and other clients from the agency were being placed in a family group home, this could possibly impair his objectivity. And this should be avoided because it could be construed as a multiple relationship. But what's important to note that just because someone has a multiple relationship doesn't mean that their behavior is unethical. We're going to go to the next slide. So long story short, it tells you, I'm telling you that a multiple relationship occurs when a social worker, counselor, or marital therapist is in a professional role with the person who is one at the same time is in another role with the same person. Two, at the same time, is in a relationship with the person closely associated with or related to the person. Or three, promises to enter into a relationship in the future that's closely associated or related to the person. So we're going to go to the next slide.
So Judy, I'm just going to interrupt you here.
Yes.
A lot of us have, especially for Arabic speaking and Russian speaking, Ukrainian speaking clients, we are both a husband and a wife, or jointly a couple of family members. And so what we're going to be rolling out over the next couple of weeks is a very simple attestation that we will ask you to get your clients signed to allow us to continue serving them in exactly the same way.
That's right. Go to the next one. As you can see, that just is an example, and that's exactly what I want to say. Here, it will be permissible for Bam Bam to place his and other agency clients into Dino's group home if Bam Bam and Bedrock Agency adhere to this standard. So basically what it says is if he discloses to the client that the group home is operated by Dino, who's his relative, then placing his clients in the home and that of the agency may be permissible with their consent. Go forward to the next one because I want to make sure certain things you got to get out of this. Before you can do this, though, you first have to ensure that your client has capacity. And basically, you should meet with the client, do a note, so that when you're telling them about this, do an accompanying note that says their response to it. Also, if this client has a legal guardian, you cannot do this without the permission, written consent of the legal guardian, because that person acts on behalf of the client. We're going to go to the next slide. Bam Bam might have a conflict of interest if he puts the people in the relative's home, and if he documents the conflict in their record and discusses the conflict with the supervisor. It's not a conflict. It's a multiple relationship, but it's not a conflict. Further, it might be in the client's best interest to be placed in Dino's group home because maybe the rent is affordable with good food and care. If it's a nice, safe home and Bam Bam adheres to the rules, he is not unethical and did not violate the rule. Let's go to the next one. What's important here is to also remember that clients are, of Bam Bam's are also clients of the agency. So that means if Bam Bam's client is on his caseload, all the other workers, that client is their client too, as per the rule. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? So I'm talking a little fast. That means that if I have a client and it's on my caseload and I work with you all, and it's Melanie's client too. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So what if Bam Bam works for both agencies? So basically what should happen is Bedrock should have a policy that says all outside employment should be disclosed to the agency. There's going to be questions. This is where conflict comes up. There could be serious questions raised about Bam Bam's objectivity if, in respect to what's in the client's best interest, if he's, working and being paid by Dino's group home. Example, if Dino's group home is not serving the residents 3 meals a day, and on some days the residents are not being fed at all, if Bam Bam is working in Dino's group home, he may not act in the residents' best interest to remove them from this neglectful situation because he has a financial incentive to keep them in Dino's home. Go to the next slide, please. However, if Bam Bam discloses his conflict to Bedrock Agency, his clients in Dino, and it can be documented in writing, this is not a violation of the rule. Also, if Bam Bam does not disclose his conflict, he and the agency can be in violation of the rule, and the Ethics Commission could be called in to investigate, and it could cause licensure issues for Bam Bam, and it could cause monetary fines for Bam Bam and the agency. Let's go to the next slide. I want you all to know that my book, won the Book of the Year award. I said that. It was an independent author contest I was in. We'll go to the next one. This is the last part. Basically, this workbook, I wrote it because people told me and they said, you know, they wanted to know more about mental health. So I wrote this. It has a whole bunch of information about confidentiality, treatment plans, understanding the functions of the professionals on the team, advanced directives, and more. It also has exercises and reading questions. But it is a very good resource for people, particularly some of you all who are not licensed. You might want to really go through it. It's something that you can help your clients with because a lot of times they don't understand how the team works together. You can use this to help them understand that. You can help them understand treatment planning with this. And I know everybody has to go, but I'm going to open it up quickly to questions because that's it for me. Also, you can all follow me on my website. You can visit me by going to my website at www.novelistjjwinston. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram at novelistjjwinston. All righty. Yay. We did it. Question.
Thank you so much, Judy.
You are so welcome.